I found the receipt first. Not the kind that comes with groceries or gas, nothing ordinary like that. It was folded into a tight square and shoved deep inside the pocket of his winter coat, the heavy one he only wore when he wanted to look respectable. The paper was warm from being pressed against his body all day, and it smelled faintly like his cologne, clean and sharp, like cedar and something bitter. For a second, I held it like it could burn me. The kitchen was quiet except for the old wall clock ticking above the microwave. That steady tick-tick-tick felt louder than it should have, like it was counting down to something I didn't want to face. Outside, the evening was sliding in slow, turning the windows into dark mirrors. I could see my own face reflected there, tired eyes, lips pressed tight, the kind of look a woman wears when she's been understanding for too long. I told myself it was nothing. I had made a whole life out of telling myself that. Because when you forgive someone, truly forgive them, you don't keep digging. You don't keep checking. You don't go looking for reasons to reopen old wounds. That's what I always believed. That's what I preached to my friends, to my sister, even to my own mother when she warned me years ago that a man's apologies can be as practiced as his lies. But that receipt had a date on it 2 nights ago, and a room number, and a hotel name I recognized because it wasn't in our town. I stood there with my fingers shaking, the paper trembling like it was alive, and I thought of all the times I had swallowed my hurt to keep our home standing. All the times I had told myself love meant patience, that marriage meant endurance, that people could change. I heard his car door outside, the familiar click, followed by his footsteps on the walkway. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to wipe my hands and greet him like everything was fine. I just stood there, holding the proof, waiting to see if my heart would break quietly or finally speak. Before all of this, the receipt, the hotel, the unraveling, I used to think my life was plain in the best way. Not perfect. Never perfect. But steady. My husband, Marcus, and I had been married 13 years. We weren't one of those couples who posted matching photos online or called each other best friend in public like it was a performance. Our love was the kind that lived in routines, his coffee mug on the left side of the sink, my habit of folding towels the same way every time, the quiet comfort of knowing someone's footsteps well enough to tell if they were tired before they even spoke. We had one child, a daughter named Layla, 12 years old, bright-eyed and stubborn in the way that made me proud and scared at the same time. She had Marcus's dimples and my mouth, the same mouth that could go soft when I was happy or go hard when I was trying not to cry. I worked as a patient coordinator at a dental office, which meant my days were filled with appointment reminders, insurance calls, and smiles I wore even when my feet ached. Marcus worked in sales, regional accounts, he called them. He traveled sometimes, mostly short trips, and he had a way of making it sound important without ever getting too specific. We lived in a modest 2-story house on a quiet street where the neighbors waved, but didn't pry. Our backyard had a tired old swing set Marcus promised every summer he'd fix. The paint on our porch railings was peeling at the edges. The kitchen faucet had a slow drip I'd learned to ignore. It was real life. Ordinary life. And honestly, after what we'd been through, ordinary felt like a blessing. Because Marcus hadn't always been steady. There was a season early in our marriage, a season I still struggled to talk about without feeling that familiar tightness in my throat, when I found messages on his phone. Late-night texts. Flirty ones. The kind that start with jokes and end with things nobody should be saying to someone who isn't their spouse. I remember confronting him in our bedroom, my hands cold, my voice low because Layla was a baby then and asleep in the next room. I remember the way he looked at me, not angry, not even ashamed at first, just startled, like I'd interrupted him mid-sentence. He said it wasn't real. He said it was just talking. He said he'd been stressed and stupid. And then he cried. I had never seen him cry like that. His shoulders shaking, his face buried in his hands, the kind of tears that make you question your own anger because it looks too human to hate. I don't want to lose you, he kept saying. Please. I'll fix it. I'll do anything. I didn't forgive him in one night. I didn't wake up the next morning with a clean heart. But I stayed. I stayed because Layla was small. Because my mother had raised me to believe marriage was something you fought for. Because Marcus went to counseling twice a month, then once a month. Because he gave me access to his phone, his email, everything. And because, slowly, he became the man I wanted to believe he could be. For years, it felt like he had changed. He was present. He showed up to Layla's school events. He held my hand in the grocery store. He started doing small things, packing my lunch sometimes, rubbing my shoulders while I cooked. He looked me in the eyes when he talked, like he meant it. Over time, that old pain became something I could carry without bleeding. I told myself the past was the past. I told myself forgiveness was proof of strength. And then, about 4 months ago, little things began to shift, not loud enough to call a crisis, just subtle enough to make me feel like I was walking on a floor that had started to creak. Marcus started guarding his phone again. Not dramatically. He didn't snatch it away when I walked in. He didn't accuse me of spying. He just angled the screen away, took calls in the garage, turned his phone face down on the table like it had secrets that could spill out if it stayed upright. His travel schedule changed too. Last minute, he'd say, slipping on his dress shoes while I stood at the stove. Client moved the meeting. I gotta go tonight. At first, I didn't question it. Sales was unpredictable. That was always his excuse, and it used to be true. But then the trips got longer. And his explanations got shorter. The first time I felt that old fear rise up, it happened on a Thursday night. Layla had fallen asleep on the couch with her math workbook open, pencil still in her hand. I carried her upstairs, tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead. When I came back down, Marcus was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone with a half smile that didn't belong to me. I watched him for a second before he noticed. When he looked up, his face changed fast, like he'd pulled a curtain shut. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. "You're smiling." He shrugged. "Just a meme. You know, work group chat." He didn't show me. And maybe that was the smallest thing. A silly little moment. Something I could have ignored if my body didn't recognize the feeling so well, like my stomach had dropped into my shoes. I went to bed that night beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. The sheets smelled like laundry detergent and the faint salt of his skin. His arm draped over me like a habit. And I stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I wasn't back in that old nightmare. In the weeks that followed, I tried to be the woman I had trained myself to be. The forgiving woman. The reasonable woman. The woman who didn't accuse without proof. But suspicion doesn't always come as a thought. Sometimes it comes as a physical thing. A tight chest when the phone buzzes and he steps outside to answer it. A sour taste when he tells you he's too tired to talk but stays up late tapping on a screen. A sudden heat behind your eyes when he stops asking about your day. One evening, I asked him softly, carefully, "Are we okay?" He looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Of course we're okay," he said, reaching for a glass from the cabinet. "Why would you even ask that?" I wanted to say, "Because I can feel you slipping." Instead I said, "Just checking." He kissed my cheek. Quick. Light. Like a stamp on an envelope. And then he walked away. I remember standing there with dish soap on my hands, watching his back, thinking, if you've forgiven someone once, does that make them brave enough to hurt you again? That question sat in my chest for weeks. And then, 2 nights ago, Marcus came home later than usual. He smelled like a hotel, clean linens and strong soap, not like an office or a long drive. He went straight to the shower, humming under his breath like the day had treated him kindly. The next morning, he was in a hurry. He kissed Layla's head, grabbed his coat, and left before I could even ask if he'd be home for dinner. And that evening, standing alone in my kitchen, I reached into the pocket of that heavy winter coat to hang it properly. That's when my fingers touched the folded paper. That's when my life split into a before and an after. And that's when I realized forgiveness doesn't erase instincts. Sometimes it only delays them. His key slid into the front door lock. I heard the door open, the cold air sweeping in with him, carrying the scent of outside, wet pavement, and winter wind. "Hey, babe," Marcus called out, his voice cheerful, practiced. I didn't answer right away. I stared down at the receipt again, at the printed ink that didn't care about my feelings. At the date, the room number, the total. Then I folded it neatly and set it on the kitchen table right in the center, like a place setting. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, loosening his tie, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. And then he saw the paper. His smile didn't vanish all at once. It cracked first, just a thin fracture at the edges, before it fell away completely. He stopped walking. His eyes flicked from the receipt to my face. And in that quiet moment, with the clock ticking above us, I felt something settle inside me. Not rage, not panic. Something colder. Something clear. "Where were you 2 nights ago?" I asked. My voice surprised even me. Calm. Even. Like a woman reading weather. Marcus swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "What is that?" "You tell me," I replied. He took a step forward, reached for the receipt like he could snatch it back into silence. I placed my hand over it. "No," I said. "Not until you answer." His eyes narrowed slightly, and I saw the old Marcus, the one who thought charm could smooth everything over. "Baby," he started, voice soft, "you're misunderstanding." "I'm not," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. He stood there, breathing through his nose, looking at me like he was calculating how much truth he could afford. And I realized this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a reckoning. Marcus didn't sit down. That was the first thing I noticed after my question settled into the air between us. He stayed standing, one hand braced on the back of the chair like he might need it to keep his balance. The kitchen light hummed faintly above us, and somewhere in the house, the heater clicked on with a tired sigh. "Say something," I said, not raising my voice. He rubbed his face, slow and deliberate, like he was buying time. "You went through my pockets?" "I was hanging up your coat," I replied. "Don't change the subject." Silence stretched. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but loud in my ears. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me. I'd always imagined that if this moment ever came again, I'd feel weak or hysterical. But standing there, my hands resting flat on the table, I felt anchored, like my body had already decided it was done being fooled. "It's not what you think," he finally said. I gave a short, humorless breath. That sentence, I said quietly, has never led anywhere good. He pulled out a chair and sat down then, shoulders slumping, eyes dropping to the receipt under my hand like it was a dead thing between us. "I was out of town for work," he said. "You know that." "I know you said you were," I replied. "That's not the same thing." He looked up at me, irritation flickering behind his eyes. "I didn't cheat on you." The words landed wrong. Too fast. Too rehearsed. I tilted my head slightly. "That's not what I asked." He clenched his jaw. I picked up the receipt and slid it across the table toward him. "Tell me whose name was on that reservation." "Because it wasn't yours." His fingers hovered over the paper but didn't touch it. And that was when I saw it, the tiniest flicker of fear. Not panic. Not guilt. Fear of losing control of the story. "It was for a client," he said. "A woman from out of state. She needed a place to stay last minute. I put it on my card and she reimbursed me." I waited. When he realized I wasn't responding, he added, "That's all." I nodded slowly, as if considering it. Then I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my phone. His eyes followed the movement. "I called the hotel," I said. "About an hour ago." He stiffened. I asked if a woman stayed there under that reservation. I asked if anyone else checked in with her. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "They told me," I continued, "that the room was booked for 2. That both guests checked in together. And that housekeeping logged the room as occupied the entire night." The color drained from his face so fast it startled me. "You went that far?" he asked, his voice low. I looked at him then, really looked. At the lines around his mouth that hadn't been there a few years ago. At the eyes I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world. "You taught me how," I said. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "You're blowing this out of proportion." That was when something inside me snapped, not loudly, not violently, but cleanly, like a thread finally giving way. "Don't," I said. One word. Flat. "Don't insult me like that." We sat there, facing each other, the table between us feeling wider than it ever had before. Finally, Marcus spoke again, quieter this time. It didn't mean anything. There it was. The confession dressed up as comfort. I let the words sit, tasting them. So it did happen. He didn't deny it. He stared at the tabletop, running his thumb along a scratch in the wood we'd put there years ago, moving furniture. It was a mistake, he said. I told you I've been stressed. Work's been insane. You've been busy. Layla's older now. We barely talk. Stop, I said. My voice cracked, just slightly, but I didn't let it break. Do not make this about me. He flinched. I forgave you once, I continued. I rebuilt this marriage with you. I trusted you again when it would have been easier to walk away. He looked up then, eyes wet. I know. And I hate myself for this. I really do. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The legs scraped against the tile, loud and final. You don't hate yourself, I said. You hate getting caught. That landed. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders sagging. What do you want me to do? He asked, muffled. I'll end it. I swear. I'll quit my job if I have to. We can go back to counseling. I watched him say all the right things, the same way he had years ago. And suddenly, I saw the pattern with painful clarity. This wasn't a relapse. This was a cycle. I already did counseling, I said. I already forgave. I already gave you the benefit of the doubt when it cost me my peace. He reached for my hand across the table. I stepped back. Don't, I said again. His hand dropped. What about Layla? He asked. You're just going to break up our family? I felt that one hit, right in the chest. But it didn't stop me. You broke it, I replied. I'm just acknowledging it. That night, Marcus slept on the couch. Or at least, he tried to. I heard him shifting, sighing, getting up for water. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts moving in slow, heavy circles. I didn't cry. I felt hollow, like a room after furniture's been removed. The next morning, I packed Layla's lunch as usual. I braided her hair. I listened to her talk about a science project she was excited about. Marcus hovered at the edges of the kitchen, silent, watching me like he didn't know where he fit anymore. When Layla left for school, he finally spoke. I'm sorry, he said. I looked at him, searching for something, anything, that might make me believe this time was different. But all I felt was tired. I know, I said. That afternoon, while Marcus was at work, or wherever he said he was, I sat at my desk and opened our shared computer. I didn't rage search. I didn't snoop wildly. I logged into our phone account. And that's when I found the call logs. A number I didn't recognize. Dozens of calls. Late nights. Early mornings. During times he'd said he was in meetings or stuck in traffic. I copied the number. Then I checked our bank statements. Hotel charges. Gas. Dinners for two at places Marcus and I hadn't been to in years. It wasn't one mistake. It was a parallel life. I sat there, hands on the keyboard, the screen glowing softly in the quiet room, and something settled in me again. Not anger. Resolve. That night, I didn't confront him with what I'd found. Instead, I made a list. Names. Dates. Amounts. I called a lawyer the next morning on my lunch break. My voice shook a little when I introduced myself, but it steadied as I spoke. I need to understand my options, I said. I'm not ready to do anything yet. She listened, asked questions, explained calmly. When I hung up, I sat in my car and finally let myself cry, just a little. Enough to release the pressure. Not enough to drown. Because forgiveness had brought me here. But clarity was going to take me somewhere else. That evening, Marcus tried to act normal. He asked about my day. He offered to make dinner. He touched my shoulder as he passed by. I let him. And that's when I realized something that surprised even me. I wasn't waiting for him to change. I was waiting for the right moment to act. The waiting was the hardest part. Not because I doubted what I knew, but because I had to live beside it. Every morning, every evening, every shared space in our house felt like a quiet performance where only I knew the ending. Marcus laughed too loudly at dinner. He volunteered to help with homework. He even suggested a weekend trip, like a man trying to paint over a crack in the wall before anyone else noticed it. I watched him carefully, not with suspicion anymore, but with distance. That distance was new. It felt like standing on the other side of glass, close enough to see everything clearly, far enough that none of it could touch me. I kept my list hidden in a folder on my phone labeled insurance, dates, times, charges, call durations. I didn't obsess over it, but I didn't forget it either. At night, when Marcus fell asleep quickly beside me, I lay awake listening to the house settle, memorizing the sound of it, like I might need to remember this version of my life later. A week passed. Then 2. Marcus grew restless. He sensed the shift, even if he didn't understand it. He started asking questions he'd never asked before. Are you mad at me? Why are you so quiet lately? You don't look at me the same. Each time, I answered honestly, but not fully. I'm thinking, I'd say. Or, I'm tired. Or sometimes, I don't know yet. Those answers unsettled him more than anger would have. One night, after Layla had gone to bed, Marcus cornered me in the kitchen. The sink was full of dishes soaking in warm, cloudy water. The smell of lemon soap hung in the air. You can't just shut me out, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. If we're going to fix this, we need to talk. I dried my hands slowly on a towel, then turned to face him. We talked, I said. You lied. That's not fair. It's accurate. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. I told you I ended it. I met his eyes. When? He hesitated. Right after that night. I nodded. That's interesting. Why? Because the call logs show you spoke to her 3 times last week. Once for 27 minutes. The words landed heavy. He froze. He stopped. Started again. She called me. I didn't want to be rude. I stared at him. I didn't answer, he added quickly. I just listened. I felt something twist in my chest, not pain this time, but disbelief so deep it almost made me laugh. Do you hear yourself? I asked softly. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That's the problem, Marcus, I continued. You don't even realize when you're lying anymore. He sank into a chair, elbows on knees, head in his hands. I don't want to lose you, he said again. I watched him from across the table, and for the first time, I saw him not as my husband, not as Layla's father, but as a man desperately trying to keep the life he'd taken for granted. You should have thought of that before, I said. That night, I slept in the guest room. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't slam doors or announce anything. I simply took my pillow, my charger, and closed the door behind me. The quiet on the other side was startling. In that small room, surrounded by boxes of old clothes and unused lamps, I felt something unexpected, relief. The next step came sooner than I planned. It was Layla. She came home from school one afternoon quieter than usual, backpack hanging low on one shoulder. She didn't rush to the kitchen for a snack like she normally did. Instead, she stood in the doorway, watching me. Mom, she asked. Yes, baby. Are you and Dad fighting? The question cut clean through me. I set down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables and turned to face her fully. I crouched so we were eye to eye. We're having some grown-up problems, I said carefully. But you don't need to worry. She studied my face like she was searching for the truth behind my words. Is he going to leave? She asked. My throat tightened. No, I said quickly. No one is going anywhere without talking first. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with the lights dimmed and made the call I'd been avoiding. My sister. She answered on the second ring. Hey, she said. What's wrong? I hadn't planned what to say, but the truth poured out anyway, quiet, controlled, but complete. I told her everything. The receipt, the calls, the lies, the lawyer. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long pause. Are you done? She asked gently. Yes, I said. The word surprised me with its certainty. Then it's time, she replied. 2 days later, I asked Marcus to meet me at a cafe near his office. Neutral ground. He looked hopeful when he arrived, like maybe this was the conversation that would save us. He ordered my usual drink without asking. I let him. When the server left, I placed a manila envelope on the table between us. What's this? He asked. My evidence, I said. And my decision. He opened it slowly, flipping through the pages. His face changed with each one: confusion, then recognition, then dread. "You've been keeping track," he said. "I've been paying attention," I corrected. He looked up at me, eyes wide. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything." "What are you saying?" he whispered. "I'm filing for separation," I said. "And I'll be asking for primary custody." The cafe noise seemed to fade around us. "You can't just," he started. "I can," I said calmly. "And I am." He reached across the table, his hand trembling. "Please, let's not do this in public." "This isn't public," I replied. "This is private. Between us." Exactly where it should have stayed. His hand fell back. "I forgave you once," I said. "That was grace. This time, I'm choosing self-respect." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. When I stood up to leave, he didn't follow. I walked out into the cool afternoon air, my chest tight but my steps steady. I knew the hardest part was still coming. But I also knew this. I wasn't lost anymore. I was finally moving forward. The public part of betrayal doesn't arrive with a bang. It seeps in quietly, through questions, side glances, and conversations that stop when you walk into a room. I learned that in the weeks after I filed for separation. Word traveled faster than I expected, even though I hadn't told many people. Maybe Marcus did. Maybe people sensed it. Or maybe marriages breaking open have a way of announcing themselves without words. Marcus moved out the following Sunday. He packed while Layla was at a friend's house, which I appreciated more than he probably realized. I stood in the hallway, arms folded, watching him carry boxes down the stairs. He moved slowly, deliberately, like if he dragged the process out long enough, I might stop him. I didn't. When he reached the door with the last box, he hesitated. "I'll call Layla tonight," he said. "She'll be expecting that," I replied. He nodded, then lingered another second. "You don't have to make me the villain," he added quietly. I looked at him, really looked. "You did that yourself," I said. "I'm just telling the truth." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then closed it. The door shut behind him with a soft click, not dramatic, not final sounding. But it was. The house felt strange without his things. Empty corners where his shoes used to be. Extra space in the bathroom cabinet. Silence in places that had always held noise. That first night alone, I sat on the couch with a blanket pulled up to my chin and let the quiet wash over me. It wasn't peaceful yet. It was unfamiliar. But it was honest. Layla took the change harder than I expected. She tried to be brave, telling me she was fine in the same tight voice she used when she wasn't. She asked questions she didn't really want answers to. Did Dad do something bad? Are you mad at him forever? Is it my fault? That last one nearly broke me. I held her close, her hair smelling like shampoo and childhood, and told her the truth in words she could carry. "This has nothing to do with you," I said. "Nothing. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt people. That doesn't mean they don't love their kids." She nodded against my chest, quiet and thoughtful. Marcus tried to stay involved. He called regularly, took Layla out on weekends, sent long messages apologizing, sometimes to me, sometimes through her. I kept my boundaries firm, civil, controlled. But he struggled when people started asking questions. His mother called me one afternoon, her voice sharp with concern. "Marcus says you're overreacting," she said. "Is that true?" I took a deep breath. "No," I replied. "It's accurate." She sighed. "Marriage is complicated." "Yes," I said. "So is betrayal." There was a pause. Then, softer, "I'm sorry you're going through this." That was enough. At work, my manager pulled me aside gently. "If you need flexibility," she said, "just let me know." I realized then how visible grief can be even when you try to carry it quietly. Marcus, on the other hand, didn't handle visibility well. I heard through mutual friends that he'd tried to explain himself, that he'd framed it as a misunderstanding, a lapse, a rough patch blown out of proportion. But the evidence spoke louder than his version ever could. The hotel receipts, the call logs, the bank statements. When our lawyers exchanged documents, there was no room left for excuses. The truth doesn't shout. It simply stands there, undeniable. The real consequence came a month later. Marcus lost his job. Officially, it was a violation of company policy. Unofficially, I knew exactly why. He'd been using company time and resources during his affair. Expense accounts. Travel privileges. Lies stacked on top of lies. He called me the night it happened, his voice raw. They let me go. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it in a distant way. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't. He stopped himself. If I hadn't told the truth? I finished. Silence. I didn't do this to you, I said calmly. I stopped protecting you. He hung up shortly after. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Layla went to bed, staring at the same surface where I'd once laid out that receipt. The memory felt distant now, like something that had happened to another woman. I wasn't celebrating his downfall, but I wasn't carrying it either. That's the difference between revenge and justice. One is fueled by anger, the other by clarity. Months passed. The house slowly became mine again. I repainted the bedroom a soft, warm gray. I fixed the leaky faucet. I threw away the chipped mugs Marcus liked and bought new ones, small changes, but meaningful. Layla adjusted too. She grew more talkative again. Lighter. She laughed more freely, like the tension she hadn't known how to name was finally gone. One evening, as we folded laundry together, she looked up at me and said, "You seem happier." I smiled, surprised by the truth of it. "I think I am." She nodded thoughtfully. "I like this version of you." So did I. Healing didn't come all at once. It arrived in moments. In mornings where I didn't dread waking up. In conversations that didn't feel like negotiations. In the quiet confidence of knowing I'd chosen myself, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. Forgiveness had been my gift once. But boundaries became my strength. And that changed everything. By the time spring arrived, the sharpest edges of the pain had dulled. Not disappeared, pain doesn't vanish like that, but softened enough that I could breathe without feeling like my chest might cave in. The trees on our street bloomed in pale pinks and whites, petals drifting onto the sidewalk like quiet reminders that time keeps moving whether you're ready or not. Marcus and I settled into a routine that worked, at least on paper. Pickups and drop-offs were scheduled. Conversations were brief and practical. We spoke mostly about Layla, school, dentist appointments, weekend plans. When we didn't have to talk about anything else, it stayed surface level. Weather. Traffic. Necessary things. There was a distance between us now that felt permanent. And I didn't try to close it. One afternoon, while cleaning out a hallway closet, I found an old photo album shoved behind winter scarves and a broken umbrella. The cover was worn, corners bent. I hadn't opened it in years. I sat down on the floor and flipped through it slowly. There we were, Marcus and me in our early 20s, smiling too wide, eyes bright with the belief that love alone could carry you through anything. Our wedding day. Layla as a baby, wrapped in pink, Marcus's hand steady under her tiny head. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a quiet gratitude for the woman I had been back then. She loved deeply. She trusted fully. She gave forgiveness freely. She just didn't know yet that forgiveness, without accountability, can cost you pieces of yourself. I closed the album and put it back, not hidden, just stored. Where it belonged. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Marcus asked to talk. Not about schedules. Not about money. About us. "I know I don't have the right," he said when we sat across from each other at the dining table. "But I need to say this." I listened. That didn't mean I owed him hope. "I didn't realize what I was losing until it was gone," he continued. "You were always there. Always steady. I thought that meant you'd always stay." I studied his face, older now, more worn. Less confident. "That's a dangerous assumption," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I see that now." He looked down at his hands. "I'm not asking you to come back. I needed you to know I finally understand." I nodded slowly. "Understanding after the damage is still understanding," I said. "But it doesn't undo what was done." He accepted that. Or at least, he didn't fight it. When he left that evening, I felt something unexpected again. Not relief. Closure. The divorce was finalized that summer. There was no courtroom drama. No shouting. Just signatures and documents and a calm, professional tone from people who see broken marriages every day. When it was over, I sat in my car with the engine off and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. I wasn't grieving the marriage anymore. I was releasing it. Life after didn't look flashy. It looked stable. I focused on work, eventually earning a promotion that had been out of reach before, partly because I'd been carrying too much emotional weight to reach for more. I started walking in the evenings, just around the neighborhood at first, then longer paths near the park. I learned to enjoy my own company again. Friends noticed the change before I fully did. "You're lighter," one of them said over coffee. "Like you're not bracing for impact anymore." She was right. I wasn't. Layla thrived too. She grew taller, louder, more confident. She stopped asking if things were her fault and started planning for the future with excitement instead of caution. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she asked, "Do you ever miss Dad?" I considered the question honestly. "I miss the idea of who I thought he was," I said. "But I don't miss being hurt." She nodded, satisfied with that answer. And then there was me. I learned something important in the quiet aftermath. Forgiveness is powerful, but it is not permission. It does not mean enduring the same wound over and over. It does not mean sacrificing your self-respect to keep someone else comfortable. Forgiving Marcus once had been an act of love. Walking away the second time was an act of survival. I didn't take revenge. I didn't scream or destroy or humiliate. I simply stopped protecting a lie. And when the truth was finally allowed to stand on its own, it did exactly what truth always does. It changed everything. Some nights, when the house is quiet and the clock ticks steadily in the background, I think about the woman I was when I found that receipt folded in a coat pocket. She was afraid, but she was also waking up. And I'm proud of her for choosing clarity over comfort, for choosing herself. Sometimes, the hardest truths don't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. They arrive folded quietly into your life, tucked into a pocket, hidden behind routines, disguised as apologies you've already accepted once. When I look back now, I realize the pain wasn't just in what Marcus did. It was in how long I convinced myself that endurance was the same thing as love. For a long time, I believed forgiveness meant staying. That strength meant swallowing discomfort. That loyalty required silence. But I learned slowly, painfully, that forgiveness without change becomes permission. And love without respect becomes a slow erosion of the self. Walking away wasn't easy. It wasn't brave in the way movies make it seem. It was quiet. It was lonely. It was signing papers with steady hands while my heart learned a new rhythm. But it was also honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, creates space for peace to grow. Today, my life isn't perfect, but it's mine. It's built on truth instead of excuses, on boundaries instead of fear, on the knowledge that I can forgive someone and still choose not to let them hurt me again. If you're listening to my story and holding something heavy in your own heart, I hope you remember this. Forgiving someone does not mean sacrificing yourself. You are allowed to ask for better. You are allowed to leave when sorry stops being enough. So I'll leave you with this question. If you were standing where I stood, holding proof in your hands and clarity in your heart, would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments. And if this story spoke to you, please consider subscribing or supporting the channel. Your presence here means more than you know.